penetrated through the loop above the pillar, and there this night also the ray ran far above us like a lance of fire, but now that we were nearer to its fount, we found ourselves bathed in a soft mysterious radiance, like that of the phosphorescence on a summer sea, reflected downwards perhaps from the clouds and massy rock roof of the column loop and diffused by the snows beneath. This unearthly glimmer, faint as it was, helped us much; indeed but for it we must have been overtaken, for here the ground was very rough, full of holes also made by burrowing marmots. Thus in our extremity help did come to us from the Mountain, until at length the moon rose, when as quickly as they had appeared the volcanic fires vanished, leaving behind them nothing but the accustomed pillar of dull red smoke. It is a commonplace to speak of the music of hounds at chase, but often I have wondered how that music sounds in the ears of the deer or the fox fleeing for its life. Now, when we filled the place of the quarry, it was my destiny to solve this problem, and I assert with confidence that the progeny of earth can produce no more hideous noise. It had come near to us, and in the desolate silence of the night the hellish harmonies of its volumes seemed terrific. Yet I could discern the separate notes of which it was composed, especially one deep, bell like bay. I remembered that I had heard this bay when we sat in the boat upon the river, and saw that poor noble done to death for the crime of loving the Khania. As the hunt passed us then I observed that it burst from the throat of the leading hound, a huge brute, red in colour, with a coal black ear, fangs that gleamed like ivory, and a mouth which resembled a hot oven. I even knew the name of the beast, for afterwards the Khan, whose peculiar joy it was, had pointed it out to me. He called it Master, because no dog in the pack dared fight it, and told me that it could kill an armed man alone. Now, as its baying warned us, Master was not half a mile away. The coming of the moonlight enabled us to gallop faster, especially as here the ground was smooth, being covered with the short dry turf, and for the next 2 hours we gained upon the pack. Yes, it was only 2 hours, or perhaps less, but it seemed a score of centuries. The slopes of the peak were now not more than 10 miles ahead, but our horses were giving out at last. They had borne us nobly, poor beasts, though we were no light weights, yet their strength had its limits. The sweat ran from them, their sides panted like bellows, they breathed in gasps, they stumbled and would scarcely answer to the flogging of our spear shafts. Their gallop sank to a jolting canter, and I thought that soon they must come to a dead stop. We crossed the brow of a gentle rise, from which the ground, that was sprinkled with bush and rocks, sloped downwards to where, some miles below us, the river ran, bounding the enormous flanks of the Mountain. When we had travelled a little way down this slope, we were obliged to turn in order to pass between 2 heaps of rock, which brought us side on to its brow. And there, crossing it not more than 300 yards away, we saw the pack. There were fewer of them now, doubtless many had fallen out of the hunt, but many still remained. Moreover, not far behind them rode the Khan, though his second mount was gone, or more properly he was riding it, having galloped the first to a standstill. Our poor horses saw them also, and the sight lent them wings, for all the while they knew that they were running for their lives. This we could tell from the way they quivered whenever the baying came near to them, not as horses tremble with the pleasurable excitement of the hunt, but in an extremity of terror, as I have often seen them do when a prowling tiger roars close to their camp. On they went, as though they were fresh from the stable, nor did they fail again until another 4 miles or so were covered, and the river was but a little way ahead, for we could hear the rush of its waters. Then slowly but surely the pack overtook us. We passed a clump of bush, but when we had gone a couple of 100 yards or so across the open plain beyond, feeling that the horses were utterly spent, I shouted to Leo "Ride round back to the bush and hide there." So we did, and scarcely had we reached it and dismounted when the hounds came past. Yes, they went within 50 yards of us, lolloping along upon our spoor and running all but mute, for now they were too weary to waste their breath in vain. "Run for it," I said to Leo as soon as they had gone by, "for they will be back on the scent presently." And we set off to the right across the line that the hounds had taken, so as not to cut our own spoor. About 100 yards away was a rock, which fortunately we were able to reach before the pack swung round upon the horses' tracks, and therefore they did not view us. Here we stayed until following the loop they came to the patch of bush and passed behind it. Then we ran forward again as far as we could go. Glancing backwards as we went, I saw our two poor, foundered beasts plunging away across the plain, happily almost in the same line along which we had ridden from the rise. They were utterly done, but freed from our weights and urged on by fear, could still gallop and keep ahead of the dogs, though we knew that this would not be for very long. I saw also that the Khan, guessing what we had done in our despair, was trying to call his hounds off the horses, but as yet without avail, for they would not leave the quarry which they had viewed. All this came to my sight in a flash, but I remember the picture well: the mighty, snow clad peak surrounded by its column of glowing smoke and casting its shadow for mile upon mile across the desert flats; the plain, with its isolated rocks and grey bushes; the doomed horses struggling across it with convulsive bounds; the trailing line of great dogs that loped after them, and amongst these, looking small and lonely in that vast place, the figure of the Khan and his horse, of which the black hide was beflecked with foam. Then above, the blue and tender sky, where the round moon shone so clearly that in her quiet, level light no detail, even the smallest, could escape the eye. Now youth and even middle age were far behind me, and although a very strong man for my years, I could not run as I used to do. Also I was most weary, and my limbs were stiff and chafed with long riding, so I made but slow progress, and to worsen matters I struck my left foot against a stone and hurt it much. I implored Leo to go on and leave me, for we thought that if we could once reach the river our scent would be lost in the water, at any rate that it would give us a chance of life. Just then, too, I heard the belling bay of the hound master, and waited for the next. Yes, it was nearer to us; the Khan had made a cast and found our line. Presently we must face the end. "Go, go," I said. "I can keep them back for a few minutes, and you may escape. It's your quest, not mine. Ayesha awaits you, not me, and I am weary of life. I wish to die and have done with it." Thus I gasped, not all at once, but in broken words, as I hobbled along clinging to Leo's arm. But he only answered in a low voice "Be quiet, or they will hear you," and on he went, dragging me with him. We were quite near the water now, for we could see it gleaming below us, and oh! how I longed for one deep drink. I remember that this was the uppermost desire in my mind, to drink and drink. But the hounds were nearer still to us, so near that we could hear the pattering of their feet on the dry ground, mingled with the thud of the hoofs of the Khan's galloping horse. We had reached some rocks upon a little rise, just where the bank began, when Leo said suddenly "No use, we can't make it. Stop and let's see the thing through." So we wheeled round, resting our backs against the rock. There, about 100 yards off, were the death hounds, but Heaven be praised, only 3 of them. The rest had followed the flying horses, and doubtless when they caught them at last, which may have been far distant, had stopped to gorge themselves upon them. So they were out of the fight, only 3 and the Khan, a wild figure, who galloped with them, but those 3, the black and red brute, Master, and 2 others, almost as fierce and big. "It might be worse," said Leo. "If you will try to tackle the dogs, I will do my best with the Khan." And stooping down he rubbed his palms in the grit, for they were wet as water, an example which I followed. Then we gripped the spears in our right hands and the knives in our left, and waited. The dogs had seen us now and came on, growling and baying fearfully. With a rush they came, and I am not ashamed to own that I felt terribly afraid, for the brutes seemed the size of lions and more fierce. One, it was the smallest of them, outstripped the others, and, leaping up the little rise,